Welcome our viewers here in Lagos and around the world. I'm Anne Mwawadu. Let's get right into it. An absolute lie. That is what the Kremlin is calling accusations that Russia had anything to do with the death of the Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin. During a conference call between Kremlin spokesperson and journalists, Dmitry Peskov said that the allegations the Kremlin gave an order to kill Prigozhin are a complete lie and that the facts needed to be clarified by an official investigation, which is still ongoing. This is in reaction to a number of Western officials who have pointed the finger of blame at Russian authorities over Prigozhin's death. On Thursday, President Vladimir Putin broke silence over the plane crash that the Wagner chief was said to have boarded. Mr. Putin described Prigozhin as a talented businessman who made serious mistakes in life, also paying condolences to families of passengers in the crash.
I want to express my sincerest condolences to the families of all the victims. It is always a tragedy. Indeed, if there were, and the primary data indicates that there were employees of the Wagner PMC, I would want to note that these people made a significant contribution to our common cause of fighting the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. I knew Yevgeny Prigozhin for a very long time, since the early 1990s. He was a man with a complicated fate, and he made serious mistakes in life. He achieved the results he needed both for himself and, when I asked him, for the common cause, as in these last months. He was a talented person, a talented businessman. The head of the investigative committee reported to me that they have already launched a preliminary investigation into this incident, and it will be carried out in full and to the end.
Well, as Russia denies any involvement in Prigozhin's death, people across the country continue to pay tribute to the leader, laying flowers and lighting candles. A number of memorials have been set up, including near Wagner's headquarters in St. Petersburg. Prigozhin was branded a traitor by President Vladimir Putin back in June after his short-lived rebellion against the conventional Russian army. However, he remained popular among Russians who acclaimed the battlefield achievements of the Wagner paramilitary group despite many accusations of abuses and war crimes. His death now leaves the Wagner group leaderless and raised questions about its future operations in Africa and elsewhere. In the meantime, a group of Russian militants who fought in the Ukrainian side are now calling on the Wagner group of mercenaries to switch sides and join their ranks to revenge the death of their founder, Prigozhin, and their commander, Dmitry Utkin. In a video released, the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps, Denis Kapustin, said they should take revenge instead of, quote, serving as watchdogs for the Russian Defense Ministry. Kapustin, who's a far-right Russian national, founded the armed group 1 year ago. The RVC, which is the armed group, fights on the Ukrainian side and said it was behind several military attacks on Russian border regions. While amidst uncertainty on Prigozhin's death, British intelligence is suggesting that the Wagner mercenary chief was most likely on board the plane that crashed in Moscow on Wednesday. In its daily update, the Ministry of Defense said there is no definitive proof as yet that Prigozhin was on that plane, but it is highly likely he is dead. Russian authorities say he was listed as a passenger on the plane, which fell from the sky. However, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the United Kingdom is working closely with its allies to understand exactly what happened.
Well, our intelligence suggests that Prigozhin was most likely on the plane. We're obviously monitoring the situation very closely, working with our allies to establish what happened. But the most important thing here is for Putin to end his illegal invasion of Ukraine, which is causing untold suffering to people. And we will continue to stand with Ukraine, support them so that they can resist that aggression from Russia.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Defense says there is currently no information to suggest that the surface-to-air missile took down the plane presumed to be carrying Prigozhin. Brigadier General Patrick Ryder, who's a Pentagon spokesman, offered no further details or evidence as he made his remarks at the Pentagon news conference. Russian investigators have opened a probe into what happened, but have not officially confirmed the identities of the 10 bodies recovered from the wreckage.
Department of Defense is announcing today that the United States will soon begin training Ukrainians to fly and maintain F-16 fighter aircraft in support of the international effort to develop and strengthen Ukraine's long-term defenses. Following English language training for pilots in September, F-16 flying training is expected to begin in October at Morris Air National Guard Base in Tucson, Arizona, facilitated by the Air National Guard's 162nd Wing. Although we do not have specific numbers to share at this time in regards to how many Ukrainians will participate in this training, we do anticipate it will include several pilots and dozens of maintainers. The training provided by the United States will complement the F-16 pilot and maintenance training that's already underway in Europe and further deepens our support for the F-16 training coalition led by Denmark and the Netherlands. Moving forward, we will remain in close consultation with the Danes, the Dutch, and other allies to ensure U.S. training complements the broader coalition training effort. Initial assessment is that it's likely Prigozhin was killed. We're continuing to assess the situation. We don't have any information to indicate right now. The press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane. That we assess that information to be inaccurate. Again, nothing to indicate, no information to suggest that there was a surface-to-air missile. But beyond that, I'm really just not going to have any further information.
Prigozhin's name and influence are widespread throughout Africa, with pro-Wagner imagery having become mainstays of group coups and anti-Western protests in Mali, Burkina Faso, and most recently Niger. Pro-Russian activists in Niger are now expressing grief over the presumed death of the Wagner Group chief, Prigozhin, while emphasizing that his presumed passing will not hinder ongoing Russian-Nigerian military cooperation in the war-torn Sahel region. Residents of the capitals of Burkina Faso and the Central African Republic also are largely apathetic to the news, emphasizing that the region's ties to the Russian state outweighed any loyalties to a single man. Last time Prigozhin was seen was in a video address, possibly shot in Africa, posted on the Telegram's channels affiliated with the Wagner Group on Monday. He was seen standing in a desert area in a camouflage and saying the Wagner is recruiting people. The group has fought in Libya, Syria, the Central African Republic, and Mali, among other countries. The presumed death of the mercenary leader Prigozhin in a plane crash could mean that Russian President Vladimir Putin loses strength in both Ukraine and West Africa. And that's according to an analyst, Andrew Borin, who is the executive director of the threat intelligence firm Flashpoint. Mr. Borin forecast a loss of effectiveness for President Putin in both areas, with a possibility of a Game of Thrones-style struggle between Wagner and the military factions in Putin's military organization. Another analyst, Samuel Ramani of London's RUSI, thinks that the RUSI think tank says that Prigozhin had been useful to Mr. Putin in sustaining Russia's security relationships in Africa.
It will be interesting to see what happens within the Putin regime now. Obviously, Mr. Prigozhin had become quite a critic of the operation, what they call a special military operation in Ukraine. It now does create some breathing room if Putin were to decide to withdraw and kind of maintain some face or political cover. He could blame that on failings of the Wagner Group. On the other hand, it's not clear kind of who's going to backfill this space in Putin's inner circle. And, you know, traditionally Russian big army military doctrine would lead toward long, slow grinding offensives, counteroffensive, and in many ways almost a 21st century kind of a trench warfare. Prigozhin and the Wagner network were famous for doing things more of a hybrid nature, running disinformation campaigns, really unsavory tactics and operations on the battlefield.
So the most likely scenario is making Wagner effectively a more tightly integrated arm of the Russian Defense Ministry and actually replacing the deals that Wagner has with Russian Defense Ministry deals for the time being. The Russian Deputy Defense Minister visited Benghazi one day before Prigozhin's death to discuss that kind of arrangement with Khalifa Haftar. We've already seen the Central African Republic President Faustin Archange Touadera talk about how Beethoven's and Mozart's are okay if we can't get Wagner, so that's why I suspect we'll follow more direct nationalization of the Wagner Group. Well, I think it really just shows that ultranationalists pose a grave threat to the regime stability inside Russia. And the fact that the war in Ukraine has not gone to plan, the fact that his top two military commanders, Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, are so reviled by that faction, means that he needs to now use coercion to keep them quiet. And this is not the only time in which coercion has been used. It's the most dramatic example, but not the only one. We've also seen Igor Girkin, the MH17 perpetrator, be put in jail for extremism charges. And we've also seen the General Sergei Surovikin, the commander of the aerospace forces, just dismissed formally hours before Prigozhin's death. So this is part of a broader crackdown on ultranationalists ahead of the March 2024 election to present another kind of mutiny or another kind of insurrection that is basically aimed at changing the Russian military leadership.
Well, joining us now is Osarume Izebokum. He's a research consultant with Padlink. He joins us from Germany. Thank you very much for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
All right, so let's begin with your thoughts on the presumed death of the Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Well, basically, I like it. I like the way you're putting it, presumed, and that is the position of the UK Defense Ministry. They feel using the word presumed would be most appropriate. And then we have the New York Times saying that there is a lot of controversy. There's a lot of school of thought, that there are lots of, theories flying around. But then the concern comes from the Wagner camp. The Wagner camp itself. They say, they purport, they have alleged that the plane was shot down, by the air defense apparatus of Russia. Now, that goes to show that in the coming months, we're going to have a lot of interesting dimensions, a lot of activities, war effort developments for Russia. We're going to have a lot of people coming up, to prefer Prigozhin as a martyr, and this, I believe, is the dimension that we should begin to address the presumed death of Prigozhin. Now, first and foremost, you need to understand that subterfuge, from that part of the world has been a political thing. See, it's a political normal thing, from that part of the world to use subterfuge. Now, in 2019, the same Yevgeny Prigozhin was alleged to have also died. You need to understand this. His plane, according to the news at the time, was that his plane was shot down in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But then 3 days after, he resurfaced. So we must begin to be very, very careful when talking about, the death of a very significant actor like Yevgeny Prigozhin. So we should look at this issue as it unravels. you know, in the coming days.
Well, I believe so too. But I mean, one could say that Prigozhin was a man with a target on his back, but because you've also said that the Wagner Group have already said that plane was shot down. Russia has denied killing and even ordering this killing. Ukraine had also denied killing him. What do you actually think?
Well, they have all denied these facts, but then we should understand that the person of Prigozhin was a very controversial figure, a very controversial figure that had been kept in wraps for several years. You see? Now, I believe that the moment when Prigozhin came out to say that I founded Wagner in 2014. Remember, he said that this year, as the war in Ukraine began to unwrap itself, he said that I founded Wagner in 2014 to protect the Russian-speaking, peoples in Donbass area. He said that, and I believe that was the moment he began to step on toes. Remember, Russia, prides itself in being very still in their various war actions and enterprise. He came out to prove to the world, to show to the world, to announce to the world, thereby hampering a security process. Now, that is one. We also understand that during this war, that Prigozhin had actually asked that Wagner become a kind of parallel military arm within the Russian political state. And this was very unacceptable because it would be like, you're running a parallel government, and with the kind of hothead that he was, they would not allow him. So these go on, and then you see him even attacking the Russian parliament, calling them names and all that. And this did not go on well with the political, caucus, the political group in the Russian government. And this was his undoing. And I believe that for me, just like I said, he may not have died. Let's just keep watching and see for the coming days what would happen.
It's definitely going to be an interesting week. But here in Africa, there are believed to be around 1,000 Wagner soldiers in Mali, in West Africa. The group is known to fight in other parts of the continent also. Now, Prigozhin is no longer in the picture, at least for now. Could this have any impact on this?
Well, I'd simply say that the person of Prigozhin is a networker. Allow me to speak that English. He's a networker. He's got his web. He's entrenched in the Russian interest model in Africa. He's got people, he's got people both in Russia and in traditional Africa. Now, I know why I'm calling it traditional Africa. He's gotten his web even down to the grassroots of the countries in which they operate. So basically, we have Piotr Buchov and Yaroslav Ignatovich, as two of those individuals manning the coordinating efforts, for the Wagner Group in Africa. So basically, you have a network, you have a structure in place for Wagner. And it's going to be a very difficult thing to uproot this structure. And so in the coming months, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, you're going to have people who are going to follow the Wagner leader, even in death. They're going to follow him in death. They're going to try to pursue his war aspirations in different parts, of the world, wherever they are. He's got his men. He's got his men even in Belarus. He's got his men even in Russia. You remember when the rebellion happened. You remember in Rostov-on-Don, you'd see the footage. There was this footage I saw where people were waving. They were waving the Russian flags at Yevgeny Prigozhin. So basically, I see Prigozhin as, even in death, I see him as a figure that cannot be pushed over, that cannot be pushed away, that cannot be erased from the picture, of both the African, the Russo-African relations and then the war in Ukraine.
Now, Prigozhin was a long-time ally of Putin before their fallout in June after that short-lived mutiny. Do you think that this presumed death would affect Mr. Putin or the Russian government or even the fight right now going on between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, how do I put it now? I would say that Putin is a man that that follows his interest. Now, for the much that we have researched about the different actors in Eastern Europe, we find Putin being one of the most ingenious in recruiting the talents that pursue his interest, just like he did with Prigozhin. And please, I'd like to deviate a little. I'm deviating a little because I'd like to prove to an extent, according to a particular school of research, not school of thought, school of research, that Putin may not have been part of his death, may not have been part of the process that led to his death. He may not have ordered his death. Okay? Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because Alexei Navalny, Putin's arch enemy, is still in prison. That man is more of a threat to Putin than Prigozhin. I dare to say that because he eats into the general mentality, the populace, of the Russian people. He eats into their mind. He's gotten a people that have so much believed in him over the years and has built a structure on ground in Mother Russia. And so we have a Prigozhin that goes outside into Africa to to recruit nations to follow the Russian political economic aspirations. And then you say, this is the man that I'll kill. So basically, I think we have to look into these perspectives and see for yourself which is most realistic. A Putin that kills Prigozhin, or a Putin that would prefer that Prigozhin is alive and then he manages him, because Prigozhin in death is even more dangerous to him than Prigozhin alive.
All right, thank you very much. Sarume Ezevokum, research consultant with Padlik from Germany. It's been an interesting conversation. We'll definitely be keeping tabs on the story to hear more as it develops. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you for having me.